The first step in muscle relaxation is to break, to not let myosin to bind with the actin and to cover the active sites on G actin, and that is only possible by removing calcium from the troponin, and because calcium is required for troponin to keep the active sites on G actin open. So there are pumps in endoplasmic reticulum or sarcoplasmic reticulum that push calcium into sarcoplasmic reticulum from cytoplasm. So these pumps, they use energy and push calcium back into sarcoplasmic reticulum. Although calcium concentration are higher in sarcoplasmic reticulum, they are even then pushed into because of use of energy. So pumps, they are pushing calcium, pumps are pushing calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, so that the cytoplasm become deficient of calcium, and this deficiency is fulfilled by the calcium that is detaching from troponin, and troponin, now because it is detached from calcium, it become inactive, and this inactivity causes tropomyosin to cover the G actin sites for myosin. So myosin cannot bind with the G actin sites now. So muscle cross bridges are not being formed now, and the muscle cross bridges are broken, but sarcomeres are not still on the proper length, they are in shorter form, they have to come back to the longer form, and this is not done by any process other than these three processes. They are that the contraction of a muscle in opposite direction, that is called as antagonistic muscle, opposite muscle, can bring the muscle with broken cross bridges back to its length. For example, here is a bicep and a tricep. So bicep is contracting and tricep is coming back to its length. If there is breakage of cross bridges and bicep is not contracting, then this tricep will be contracted all the time. It is cross bridges are broken, but it will not come back to its length until bicep contracts. Same is another process is force of gravity. Few of our muscles that are in line with the force of gravity, they may relax by the that force, and for example the muscles in vertebral column that keep the body in erect position, these muscles, if they their cross bridges are broken, even then they will not come to their length until they come in line with gravity. And similarly, few of the muscles like muscles of the heart and blood vessels or other tubes in the body that are the smooth muscles, they cannot come to their normal uh, length or size until there is pressure of fluid. Even though the cross bridges are broken, they need fluid pressure to come back to their normal diameter. The tube, they need fluid pressure. So these are the three processes that relaxes muscle. It means the muscle contraction is active and muscle relaxation is a passive um, mechanism. So the muscle contraction is done by the instruction from nervous system, and muscle relaxation is a passive process. So we can say a duty of muscle is to contract and not to relax. Relaxation is passive. So we saw that breakage of cross bridges need ATPs in two terms. It needs ATP for to get attached with myosin to relax, and it need ATP to push calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So if ATPs are not there due to any reason, for example due to the death of the organism, then the muscle cannot relax and they will be in contracted form. And the another thing is, if there is deficiency of ATP due to the deficiency of nutrients, or there is due to deficiency of oxygen to these muscles, we know the ATPs are generated in most of the ATPs in aerobic respiration in mitochondria. So if oxygen is not there, then there will be only ATPs available from glycolysis. So these ATPs, they are not sufficient to detach these cross bridges again and again, so there will be complete contracture. So we'll discuss it later. Muscle twitch is a single contraction of a muscle, skeletal muscle. So it is when we plotted tension in the muscle to time. So we can see that during there are three phases of muscle twitch. These phases are lag phase, contraction phase, and relaxation phase. We can see when muscle cell is stimulated by neuron releases neurotransmitter until neurotransmitter bind with sodium and there is production of action potential. That phase is called as a lag phase. There is no contraction, still action potential is running on the membrane, but it has not gone into T-tubule, or it has not released calcium. Until it releases calcium, there start binding with the troponin, and the active sites on G-actin start to release slowly, and then the myosin start to bind with these active sites. So the muscle start, few of the sarcomere of the muscle cells start to contract, and then they keep on contracting, and tension is increasing. So lag phase, there is no tension because there was no cross bridges, still action potential was running and calcium is still to release. Action potential was going into T tubules. When action potential reaches to T tubule and it has released calcium from endoplasmic reticulum, and calcium has reached to troponin, and there is formation of few cross bridges, there was a little production of tension, and then this tension gradually increases, and then it peaks in the contraction phase, and then there is pushing calcium back into the then the breakage of cross bridges from the actin due to attachment of ATP with the myosin, and then myosin get gradually they start to break from actin, and there are many now many here many myosin has detached from the cross bridges, so there is decrease in tension, and then there is no tension. So this whole is called as a muscle twitch. So muscle twitch is a single contraction that is made up of lag phase. Lag phase means that is non-active phase. Contraction phase means contraction is increasing, that is cross bridges are being formed and tension is being produced in the muscle. Tension means force. And relaxation phase is when cross bridges are getting broken because of attachment of ATP with myosin. We know myosin require ATP to get detached from the actin. So if we see a single muscle cell or a motor unit, they work as all or none law. A motor unit we know is the group of muscle cells that are controlled by a single neuron. So single neuron has extension to control various groups of muscle cell, that is called as a motor unit, and a single fiber is called as a cell of a muscle. So a single cell and a motor unit, because they are controlled by a single neuron, so they act as all or none law, mean they will either contract or not contract. When action potential will run on a single cell, it will contract with same force, and if all the time, and if action potential run on a motor unit, they will contract with same force always, or if action potential is not coming, then they will not contract. So they will not produce intermittent forces, they will not produce graded levels of forces, mean less force sometime, more force sometime, or more force sometime. So but how we can use same muscle for different activities, for example leg muscle for walking and running, if they are working in all or none law, they should produce same type of force all the time, but we are talking about all or non law for only muscle cell, individual muscle cell and motor unit, not for the whole muscle, because whole muscle is made up of many motor units. So few of the motor units, when we walk, few of the motor units of our leg muscles are working and few are resting. If we have to run, then many more muscle motor units, they start to work, and so we can produce more force. And if we run in a fast fashion, that is done by all the motor units that are working, so we can run on a full capacity. So that mechanism is called as motor unit, recruitment of motor unit. So when we can use one motor unit to produce a little force, we can use multiple motor unit to produce a little more force, and we can use all motor units to uh, produce the full capacity force of this muscle. And then so here we need to describe the threshold stimulus. Stimulus that is required to produce a single contraction in a muscle is called as a threshold stimulus. So when stimulus increases, it increases the number of motor unit, uh, or it recruits more number of unit in the contraction. So when the stimulus is less, it is for example the sub-threshold level of stimulus, it cannot produce any force of contraction, it cannot contract a single motor unit or single muscle fiber, because it is working in all or none. When stimulus is of threshold level, a motor unit will contract and produce a little force. When stimulus is of sub-maximal level, then multiple motor units will be recruited and they will work. And when stimulus is of maximal level, then the maximum number of motor units will contribute in that case. And when the stimulus is supramaximal, all the motor units will work and they will produce force, maximum force. That is called as multiple motor unit summation. Summation is summing up. So multiple motor unit get summed up and produce more force of contraction when the stimulus is from submaximal to supramaximal level. At supramaximal, all motor units they contract in a muscle, because the muscles, they are motor system. So because they are performing function, so the neurons that are controlling these muscles, they are called as motor neurons. These motor neurons, they come on the muscle fascicle and then they divide and subdivide, make branches of the axons, and these axons then make neuromuscular junction with the each cell. So there are groups of cells that are controlled by a single neuron. These groups of the muscle cell with their controlling neuron is called as a motor unit. So these motor unit will, when there will be an action potential in neuron, all of the muscles under this motor neuron will contract. So there will be a force of contraction. So when one muscle cell will be contracted, then it will produce same type of force, and when all the motor unit will contract, they will produce same type of force all the time. So that is called as all or none law. Here force of contraction or tension is plotted against time. So we can see when muscle is in relaxed form, there is no action potential running on the muscle, or there is no stimulus, or it is the stimulus is of sub-threshold level, then there is no production of tension in the muscle, so our force of contraction. When the threshold level of stimulus reaches, one motor unit responds and it is producing a little tension. and when submaximal stimuli are reaching, these submaximal can be of any grade, so they may increasing the force of contraction, and then they are producing different levels of force of contraction, because the submaximal they can be of any level, they are not maximum, less than maximum, so they are recruiting different number of motor unit, they are contracting different number of motor units. But when a maximal level of stimulus reaches, all motor units will contract, all motor units are contracting. And when supramaximal level of stimulus is reaching, then again all motor units are contracting. So there is no change in force of contraction when maximal and supramaximal level of stimulus are reaching. There is no difference between two type of stimuli, because at maximal level all the motor units of a single muscle are working, and in case of supramaximal it is not recruiting new motor unit, because they all are already contracted, so there is no more production of force. When a single action potential comes on the membrane of a muscle cell, it contracts, and the cross bridges during that contraction are formed, and then the cross bridges detach between myosin and actin, and the muscle relaxes. Uh, the if the number of action potential on the membranes are increased, that is the frequency of stimulus it is increased, then the cross bridges, when they get detached, at the same time they get attached again. So that is the contraction becomes sustained, muscle remain contracted, so the cross bridges they get detached, and then they get attached again. That is, that condition, sustained contraction, is called as tetanic contractions. So these tetanic contraction are either complete or incomplete. In incomplete tetanic contraction, the cross bridges of myosin and actin they get detached for a while, and then they get attached again, because action potentials are continuously coming. So if we see this diagram, we have plotted tension with time, and tension is the force. So if we see, if one action potential comes, then there will be a contraction, that is formation of cross bridges, formation of there is the production of force or tension, and then there is breakage of cross bridges, and then there is relaxation. So again there is an action potential, and then there is a contraction, and then there is a relaxation. So in between there is breakage of cross bridges. If multiple uh, action potential they are coming back to back, then the cross bridges are broken and then made again, and then broken and then are made again. So there is decrease in relaxation phase of the muscle cell. And if action potential are more than this, then this refractory period between the two cross bridge formation will decrease more, and so the cross bridges they get detached and get attached, so on. So there is a condition when there are continuously back to back action potential, so the contraction become permanent or sustained all the time. So it is due to the cross bridges, they are not getting detached, they are attached and producing a continuous force, that is called as a complete tetanus. Here at the 2 and 3 and 4 it is incomplete tetanus, but in when the cross bridges are broken for a short time, that is called as incomplete tetanus. In complete tetanus, the cross bridges they are completely uh, they are attached, and they are not getting broken in between. So then the we know there are certain bacteria that are responsible for Clostridium tetani. So they cause tetanus. They does not they don't allow the cross bridges to get detached and muscle remain in sustained contraction phase, that is called as technique contraction also. So that is an infection. So TRAPE is a condition in which if we change the conditions of the muscles, then the force of contraction increases within same muscle cell. We said the a single muscle or a motor unit, they work in all or none law, and they that means they produce same force whenever they get contract. But it is we have to clarify that if conditions are same, then they produce same type of force. It means they are working under all or none law if conditions are same. If a muscle remain relaxed for a longer time, there are very less calcium molecule in cytoplasm. They all are pushed back into endoplasmic reticulum. So when this cell will contract, it has to release all the it has to release calcium, all the calcium from endoplasmic reticulum, and that will take time. So it will go and bind with the uh, troponin to produce the to make the cross bridges between myosin and actin. But that and at that time the action potential goes, and the cross bridges will detach and calcium will be pushed back into cytoplasm. So it will produce little force. If at the same time another action potential comes, then a little calcium is still in cytoplasm and more calcium comes from sarcoplasmic reticulum, so it can bind more troponin and more cross bridges could be made as compared to the previous one, and more force will be produced. And again, if an action potential comes, then the more calcium will come into the from endoplasmic reticulum, and still other previous molecules of the atoms or ions of calcium, they are present in cytoplasm. So now the calcium concentration is increased as compared to previous one, so they will make more they will go to more troponin and more cross bridges will be formed and more force of contraction would be produced. And later on, it is the same muscle cell would be producing same um type of force, because all the cross bridges now are already formed, so there is no addition of cross bridges, so there is no increase in force of contraction. So that process of stepwise increase in force of contraction when muscle is uh, for a longer time in relaxation and then contracted, it produces less force in first contraction, more force in second, and more in third, and so on. So that process is called as a TRAPE, a staircase increase in force of contraction of a single cell or motor unit of a muscle is called as a TRAPE. Isometric contractions are type of contraction in which the length of the muscle remains same. Iso mean same and metric mean length of the muscle remains same, but it is applying varying force of force on the weight or work. And in isotonic contraction, the force that is applied on the weight or work is same, but the length of the muscle will change. So there are two type of isotonic contraction: concentric and eccentric. So if we are holding a thing and we are lifting it up, then muscle get shorter. That is called as force is applied. Force applying on the thing is same, but the muscle length is getting shorter. That is called as concentric, going towards center. And if we are placing something on the floor, then the muscle is of the hand will get longer, and they are applying force on the weight, but they are getting longer. That is called as eccentric force of contraction. And then in isometric, for example, the muscles, if we are holding a thing in a place, then we are applying force, but the length of the muscle is not changing. And then we have another type of contraction that is called as muscular tone. Muscular tone is a sustained type of a little contraction in all the muscles of the body when the muscle as a total are relaxed even. So this muscular tone is actually due to like in a conscious and unconscious person we can differentiate that. A conscious person can hold its body, maintain posture, but an unconscious person falls because cannot hold body in erect position. It is because of muscular tone. Muscular tone is the a little contraction of the muscles when muscles are relaxed. This muscle contraction is due to the few of the motor unit remain contracted in a relaxed muscle, and they contract in cyclic fashion, mean few of the muscle in intervals, few of the muscle motor unit they contract first and then other contract others, and so on as in a cyclic fashion, so that they can maintain the positions of the organ, the shape of the organs, and the shape of the tubes of the body, and the to keep them open, and the posture of the body, uh, like the muscles in vertebral column they keep, and then the limbs, our limbs, they their motor unit they keep on contracting on intervals, so that there is a little resistance to the body position, so that is maintaining of body position and the uh, position of the limbs, and it is called as the force that is responsible is called as a muscular tone. uh, Here in this diagram we can see a person holding a book is not changing its position, applying force, but the length of the muscles remain same, so it is the isometric type of contraction. Here we can see a person that is holding book and is lifting it up. The muscles they get shorter, so it is called as concentric type of contraction. Here a person that was holding book is now putting it on table, so it is putting it down, so the muscles they are getting they are applying force, same force that is holding the weight, but they are getting longer, the muscles are getting longer, so it is called as eccentric, going away from the center. As we said previously, the muscles they are elastic too. So if we have we plot tension versus time for a muscle cell or a muscle, then we have two type of force that is produced by muscle. One is active, that is due to contraction, and a passive, that is due to stretching of the muscles. Because muscles are elastic, if we stretch them they will recoil and produce a force that is called as passive force, that is force of stretch. And if muscles are stimulated by a neuron, then they contract and actively produce a force. So when muscles produce maximum and minimum force, if the sarcomeres they are already shorter, mean cross bridges were formed, and then they were there was dragging of actin on the myosin, and then there was closure of Z disc. Z disc came close to each other, and sarcomeres are shorter, and cross bridges are broken. And again, if action potential comes and cross bridges are formed, then a little tension is produced because there is no dragging force of the actin on myosin. If we see in second case here, the uh, actin and myosin, they have optimal overlap and the sarcomeres, they are open. Then cross bridges will form, and then these Z discs, they will come together, and there will be a dragging force that the myosin will slide inside the actin, so there will be production of force. That here we can see when we plot this time with force, it is a maximum force that is produced. If the actin, they come out of myosin tubes, then there is no connection between actin and myosin. It means we have stretched muscle a lot. Then if this muscle is stimulated, then there will be a less force of contraction because there is very less cross bridges will be formed and a little force will be produced. So because there is no optimal overlap, so that a lot of cross bridges could not form. So if we see the weightlifters or athletes, they stretch first. Why they stretch? Because in order to bring muscles on optimal overlap, the actin and myosin on optimal overlap, and the sarcomere open. If they were closed, they were when they were in relaxing position, their sarcomere, their muscular sarcomere were closed. So when if they stimulate it, then they will produce a little force. But if they are stretched optimally, but not that much stretched, they are optimally stretched, then they will produce, if they are stimulated, they will produce a lot of force that is sufficient to lift a weight or to perform an activity. And if they stretch a lot, then again there will be a less production of force, so they have to optimally stretch. Fatigue is inability of muscle to work. So there are three types of fatigues. They are psychological, muscular, or synaptic. So psychological fatigue is in brain, mean it is not related with the muscle deficiencies. For example, we know the muscle, they require ATPs and calcium for their normal work. So if they are sufficient energy and the calcium in muscles, but the person thinks that he cannot perform a certain activity, cannot perform that, that is called as psychological fatigue. So the athletes or the um, players, they need spectators in order to boost their psychological capabilities, in order to perform the activities to overcome the psychological fatigues. And muscular fatigue is when muscle is not having sufficient energy, ATP in the form of ATPs, and are not having sufficient oxygen, cannot metabolize the glucose to make energy. So that is called as muscular fatigue. And then we have synaptic fatigue. Synaptic fatigue is when the nerves or neuron that are coming on the muscle cells, they have released all the neurotransmitter and they don't have any more neurotransmitter. They cannot stimulate a muscle, so that is called as a synaptic fatigue. Then there are two other terms that are contracture, physiological contracture and rigor mortis. So physiological contracture is when the ATPs are depleted in muscle. There are no more ATPs due to the rigorous activity or continuous activity. So the muscles, they are not having sufficient oxygen to convert ATPs into the glucose into ATPs. There is halt of the aerobic respiration, and only the anaerobic respiration, that is glycolysis working, so less number of ATPs are being produced, or there is no ATPs at all, then the cross bridges between myosin and actin, they cannot be broken, so there will be permanent contracture, that is called as physiological contracture of the muscles. Same is the case with rigor mortis, but it occurs in dead bodies. In dead bodies, because there is no more production of ATPs, so the cross bridges of myosin cannot detach from actin due to deficiency of ATP. The muscles remain contracted in dead bodies for a short time, and then after 24 hours they start to break up because of the activity of microorganisms. So the difference between contracture and rigor mortis is that physiological contracture occur in the living organisms and rigor mortis occurs in the dead bodies, and it is due to deficiency of ATP. Deficiency of ATP, we know one is it has to break the cross bridges, and the second thing it does is to push calcium back into sarcoplasmic reticulum so that no more new bridges, cross bridges could be formed. So if ATPs are not there, the cross bridges would be formed, they would not be broken, and then they could be again formed because the active sites on G-actin will be open due to continuous supply of calcium. ATPs are the immediate source of energy for muscle contraction. As long as adequate amount of ATPs are present, muscles can contract repeatedly for a long time. ATP must be synthesized continuously to sustain muscle contraction, and ATP synthesis must be equal to ATP breakdown because only small amount of ATPs are stored in the muscle fiber. So the first uh, source of energy is available already stored ATP, but they are for shorter time. The energy required to produce ATPs come from three sources, that is creatine phosphate, anaerobic respiration and aerobic respiration. So these are the three types of or three sources of ATPs. So creatine phosphate is a source of energy during resting condition. Energy from aerobic respiration is used to synthesize creatine phosphate. So creatine phosphate accumulate in muscle cells and function to store energy, which can be used to synthesize ATPs. As ATP levels begin to fall, ADP react with creatine phosphate to produce ATP and creatine. So ADP plus creatine phosphate give rise to creatine plus ATP. The reaction occurs very rapidly and is able to maintain ATP levels as long as creatine phosphate is available in the cell. During intense muscular contraction, however, creatine phosphate levels are quickly exhausted. ATP and creatine phosphate present in the cell provide uh, enough energy to sustain maximum contraction of 8 to 10 seconds. Then the second source of energy is the breakdown of glucose through anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration, as we know, occur in the absence of oxygen and result in breakdown of glucose to yield ATP and lactic acid. For each molecule of glucose metabolized, a net production of 2 ATP molecule and 2 molecules of lactic acid occurs. We know the pyruvic acid is formed, and then this pyruvic acid in muscles is converted into lactic acid. And the Unlike pyruvic acid, much of the lactic acid diffuses out of the muscle fiber into the bloodstream. Although anaerobic respiration is less efficient than aerobic respiration, but it is faster, especially when oxygen availability limits aerobic respiration. By using many glucose molecules, anaerobic respiration can rapidly produce ATPs for a short time. During short period of intense exercise such as sprinting, anaerobic respiration combined with the breakdown of creatine phosphate provides enough ATP to support intense muscle contraction for up to 3 minutes. So ATP formation from creatine phosphate and anaerobic metabolism is limited by depletion of creatine phosphate and glucose and the build-up of lactic acid within muscle fiber. So for 3 minutes anaerobic respiration would be working along with the creatine phosphate, but after that the muscles have to shift on aerobic respiration. So the exercises that are done for shorter time but intense exercises, they are called as anaerobic exercises because they are not using aerobic resources, so they are using more glucose and producing less energy. And in aerobic respiration it requires oxygen and that break down glucose to produce ATP, carbon dioxide and water, we know well. So compared to anaerobic respiration, aerobic respiration we know is much more efficient and it produces 38 ATP molecules for each glucose molecules, and the aerobic respiration produces many ATPs, but it is slower because it is a lengthy process. We know it is made up of electron Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. So it would be uh, lengthy. It cannot produce ATPs fast, required for fast activity. So resting muscle or muscle undergoing long-term exercise such as long distance running or other endurance exercises depend primarily on aerobic respiration for ATP synthesis. And then we have a topic that is oxygen debt. After intense exercise, the rate of aerobic metabolism remains elevated for a time. The oxygen taken in by the body above that required for resting metabolism after exercise is called the oxygen debt. It represents the difference between the amount of oxygen needed for aerobic respiration during muscle activity and the amount that actually was used. ATP produced by anaerobic respiration and used during muscle activity contribute to the oxygen debt. The increased aerobic metabolism after exercise re-establish normal ATP and creatine phosphate levels in muscle fiber. It also converts excessive lactic acid to pyruvic acid and then to glucose primarily in the liver. The glucose is used to help restore glycogen level in muscle fiber and in liver cell. So energy, we can say the oxygen that was used in order to during the muscle heavy muscle contraction, at that time the muscle could not get sufficient oxygen and muscle has depleted creatine phosphate, it has produced the lactic acid and it has broken down the glycogen. So these three resources have been used, and the later on after doing contraction, vigorous contraction, our breathing remain active as compared to the normal state. So this more oxygen that is entering into the system during uh, resting phase even is used to make up the creatine phosphate, make up the glycogen, and the breakdown of lactic acid back into glucose in liver. So this oxygen, we can say our body had used oxygen when it was not available for such activity. So later on body has to pay for this oxygen that is called as oxygen debt. Muscle cells are of two types of cells. They are slow twitch are high oxidative, or they are fast twitch or less oxidative. We know the muscle cells, they have a counterpart of hemoglobin that is called as a myoglobin. So myoglobin is only present, myo means muscle, it is only present inside the muscle cell, and it acts as storage of oxygen for muscle. So if myoglobin is present more, and the uh, so these fibers or muscle cell, they are called as high oxidative. They are also called as slow twitch because they contract slowly. So there are muscle cells that are uh, that contract slowly. They have myosin type 1. That myosin hydrolyzes ATP slowly, so that the cross bridges, they break slowly, and they respond to nervous system slowly, and the blood supply to these muscle fiber is more, and the number of mitochondria is more in order to make more ATPs, and they are always aerobic, mean they use aerobic respiration, and the so can produce a lot of ATPs. And then because they are contracting and relaxing slowly, so they fatigue slowly. And then there are muscle fiber that are called as fast, which are less oxidative. They have less myoglobin, and they have myosin type 2 that contracts fast. It hydrolyzes ATP fast, and they are responding to nervous system very fast. They have less body supply, blood supply. They have less number of mitochondria, and they are non-aerobic, and they have more glycogen stored in their muscles, so in their cells, so they can utilize that more glycogen for anaerobic activities. They fatigue quickly because they are only relying on anaerobic respiration. So they when there is depletion of ATPs, they uh, get fatigue. They there may be of two type of these muscle fibers. They are type 2X that quickly contract and fatigue deadly, and type 2A, they contract slowly and get less fatigue as compared to type 2X. So the muscle fiber that are fast, which are less oxidative, because they have little myoglobin, so they appear to be whitish. And the slow twitch are high oxidative, they have more myoglobin. Myoglobin is brownish or reddish in color, so they appear to be brownish in color. So we can differentiate these fibers. They in some birds, they are placed in different position of the body in order to perform their specific function. For example, in the keel of birds, there are more high oxidative or slow twitch fibers for the longer flights, and for example in ducks for longer swimming, and that meat at that place appear to be reddish, so because of high oxidative fibers or high oxidative muscles or slow twitch muscles. In case of the human being, these muscle fibers are intermittent, mean they are mixed, they are not separate. So we can see few of the people, they can do sprinting activities, and few can run for longer distances. So those people who can run longer distances, they have more slow twitch or high oxidative fibers in their muscles, and those that can do activities for shorter time better, they have more fast twitch or less oxidative fibers for sudden contraction, and they cannot work for longer time because their muscle get fatigued. In fish, we can differentiate these muscle easily because the muscle near fins and the tail, they are because they are work continuously, so they are slow twitch or high oxidative, and they appear to be red or brown, and the muscle or the meat away from the fins and the tail, that appear to be whitish. Exercise cannot convert slow twitch muscle fiber into fast twitch or fast twitch into slow twitch, but it can increase size and capacity of both type of muscle fiber to perform more efficiently. Intense exercise resulting in anaerobic metabolism such as weightlifting increase muscle strength and mass and result in an increased enlargement of fast twitch muscle fiber more than slow twitch muscle fiber. So if we do certain exercises, our fast twitch fibers, they will grow in size, that is called as hypertrophy of the fast twitch muscle fibers. And if we do aerobic exercises, do exercises for longer time, that cause enlargement of slow twitch muscle fibers. So the or hypertrophy of the slow twitch muscle fibers. In addition to this increase in size, the number of mitochondria and blood supply to the muscles also increases. Uh, Exercise can change the muscle fiber type only in fast twitch muscle fibers, that are the type 2X into type 2A. That is type 2X that get early fatigue to type 2A that are fatigue resistant. So that can change the type of myosin in the fast twitch muscle fiber. Hypertrophy is increase in the size of the muscles. So because the number of muscle cells are same that were at birth, only the size of the muscle increases and muscle cells increases. Atrophy, if a muscle is not used, then sarcomere will be removed from muscles, and the myofibrils, they will decrease, and the number of blood vessels, they will also decrease, and the muscle size will decrease as a whole. So that condition is called as atrophy. If a muscle is used regularly, then its size will increase, that is called as hypertrophy. The muscles, they may be used by body for production of heat. For example, if the temperature of the body decreases, then there is a response from nervous system to start shivering, and which involves rapid skeletal muscle contraction that produces shaking rather than coordinated movement. The muscle movement increases heat production up to 18 times that of resting level, and the heat produced during shivering can exceed that produced during moderate exercises. The elevated heat production during shivering helps raise the body temperature to its normal range. The skeletal muscles are under the control of conscious parts of the brain, that is the most of the muscle, they are under cerebral control of cerebral cortex, and there is a area that is called as motor area. So that motor area is controlling the it is bringing all the neurons from that area into the skeletal muscle. So skeletal muscle, as we know, are made up of a single muscle is made up of various motor units. So many neurons are controlling a single muscle in the form of motor units. So these motor units, they are controlled by conscious senses, and few of the muscle, they have their control in spinal cord. So like the muscle that are used for the walking. So the spinal cord can calibrate or control or regulate the contraction of the
skeletal muscles, but their control is only in the ultimate control is in cerebral cortex, that is by conscious senses.